Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News of this Wednesday, the 10th day of July, 2024. And as always, we're going to look at some of the top stories of the day that have something to do with what the Bible has to say our world will be like in the last days before the coming of Jesus Christ and the events associated with it. Now, if we wanted to put a headline on today's stories, it would basically be Elections Have Consequences. We see this in the US, France, and also in the UK, where the will of the majority of the people do not make any difference. We're also going to look at what the scriptures have to say about the governments of the last days, what they will look like, and how it's all coming together amazingly, just like the Bible predicts. So we are never surprised, but we're always amazed here doing breaking news. All right, let's look at the headlines. Number one, Biden's not leaving. He only cares what Jill, Hunter, and Valerie think. On Tuesday's broadcast, this is from Breitbart. On Tuesday's broadcast, the Fox Business News Kudlow program, New York Times best-selling author, Breaking Biden, and Breitbart news editor-chief Alex Marlow stated that Joe Biden will ignore calls for him to leave the 2024 race and isn't going to listen to anyone else, whether or not he should stay in the race. And he's never listened to anyone except for three people: his sister, Valerie Biden, his wife, Jill Biden, and his son, Hunter Biden. This has been true during his entire career, and all three of them want him to stay in the race. Marlow said, all this information was available to people. Joe Biden has famously been a family guy. His inner circle, his sort of kitchen cabinet, has been Valerie, Jill, and Hunter. That's who it's been. He's been a family guy since his early days in the 70s. This is 50 years of this, and we're acting shocked that he's not swayed because the Obama podcast bros think it's time for him to go. He's never cared about these people. He's never cared about the New York Times editorial page. He cares only what these three individuals think. And of course, they all want him to stay in. So here's the problem. Some 80% of the American people believe Biden is not mentally or physically qualified to continue. 7 major leftist newspapers and other publications have called for him to step down. Democrats are in a hysteria because he is staying, yet the will of the people is not considered at all. And so, like we said yesterday, it seemed to be finished. It's a slam dunk. Biden will be the candidate. So forget about editorials, forget about trying to protest him running again. With all his compromises and his ability mentally and physically, he is not going to step aside. Now, this leads us to our next headline, next two headlines, and these stories are extremely important. The next headline is the U.S. intelligence says Iran supports, funds anti-Israel protest. Avril Haines, director of the National Intelligence, says Tehran operatives posing as activists online to encourage protests stoke discord using cyber and influence campaigns on social media. The Office of the U.S. Director of National Intelligence said on Tuesday that in a public statement warned online that Iran is working to encourage pro-Palestinian anti-Israeli protests and even providing funding for them in an effort to stoke discord in American society. We reported on this before. Iranian government actors have sought to opportunistically take advantage of ongoing protests regarding the war in Gaza using a playbook we've seen other actors use over the years. We've observed actors tied to Iran's government posing as activists online, seeking to encourage protests and even providing financial support to protesters. All right. Now, this is not really breaking news in the sense that we've never heard this before. We've been talking about it, but it's interesting. The director of the National Intelligence said this on Tuesday, yesterday. Here's why it's important with our next headline. Kamala Harris lauds the emotion behind the anti-Israel protests as government admits Iran pays for them. Let me read that again. The Vice President Kamala Harris is lauding the emotion behind these anti-Israel protests as the government admits they're bought and paid for by Iran. Vice President Kamala Harris told the left-wing magazine The Nation that she applauds the emotion behind anti-Israel protests on campus, even as the government revealed that Iran is providing funding for the demonstration. In an interview Monday with Joan Walsh, Harris said that the protests, which has disrupted life on campuses and in major cities which have targeted Jews, are displaying the correct emotion with regard to the ongoing war in Gaza. And so she was asked the question, the young people have mobilized against the destruction of Gaza are unlikely to be mollified by answers that people give. What do you say to them? And here's what she said, direct quote, they're showing exactly what the human emotion should be as a response to Gaza. Then she said there are some things that protesters say I do reject, but we have to navigate it. I understand the emotion behind it. Now, Fox News also noted in the full interview that Harris expressed concern for the supposed lack of food in Gaza. Why? Because I like to cook. No kidding. She said that. The United Nations recently found that, in fact, there is no famine in Gaza, despite the anti-Israel complaints we've seen. We've done this story a couple times that there's no famine. There never has been. Israel's gone out of its way, in fact, supplying more food in Gaza than they've ever had before. And yet, she doesn't seem to get the memo on that. All right, this is a huge concern, and it should be. Basically, Biden is going to remain in the race. But a vote for him, as many have noted, is a vote for Kamala Harris for president, since we know there's no way he's going to be able to survive another 4 years, either mentally or physically, to try to run the country. So he couldn't possibly govern for that time. So if you vote for him, you're voting for her. And her attitude towards Israel is already showing, and it is not good. Elections have consequences. Now we move to France, where the headline says it all. French election proves elites will burn a country down rather than let the right win. They'd rather burn a country down than let the right win. The recent French election illustrated that elites will happily ally with left-wing radicals just to prevent the right from winning. After a promising first-round lead, France's right wing, well, not really right wing, they're on the right of center party, National Rally Party, came up short in the second round of the country's legislative election. Now, that's not true. They didn't come up short. They got 1.7 million more votes, 1.7 million more votes than the next party, this commie party. And yet, what happened, as we're going to see, after the first round of elections, which it looked like they were a slam dunk to, win the most seats, there was a three-way runoff between the National Rally, that's the commies, and I know National Rally, excuse me, that's Macron's, that's Marine Le Pen's party, the right-wing party. Then you got the NFP, that's the commie party, and the Ensemble, which is Macron's party. Okay, you get a three-way runoff. So what happens? Well, 200 different candidates from both the Ensemble and the NFP, the commies and Macron's party, withdrew from the three-way races. 200 of them withdrew. So those 200 races would be given very clearly to either one party or the other. In other words, even though the right-wing party, Marine Le Pen's party, the National Rally would probably have won most of those elections because they had the majority in these districts. What did they do? They joined together against the right to make sure her party did not win. In other words, one candidate would drop out on one side, one candidate on one election, one candidate would drop out another election, so they could combine the votes to make sure the right doesn't win. And that's exactly what happened. So you see the commie party has now something like 182 seats. It's far short of the 289 majority. The Ensemble 163 and Le Pen's party 143. And so they're down to third place, the National Rally Party, where they again have 1.7 million more votes than the next party. Why? Because a collusion went on between Macron and the commies to form this new government. The level of cooperation makes this coalition almost certain, so they're going to have to form a government. But the problem is it's going to come at a price, and here's what's going to result with France. Again, we're only a couple of weeks before the Olympics. They're still trying to work this out. Most likely it'll result in a far left and even outright communist parties becoming part of the new government. So again, we talked about the NFP, the Communist Party's calls for ramping up spending, taxing the rich 90%, spending $150 billion on projects such as climate change and immigration or migration, and basically taking France and turning it upside down with respect to its economic situation, and also the livable situation. We've had a couple of stories that French Jews are leaving the country. There's a major rabbi in France that called for them to leave. Avigdor Lieberman from here in Israel basically said it's time for every Jew to leave France because basically there's not going to be safe because you have as the leader, an anti-Semitic, Jew-hating person who would not condemn the October 7th massacre, who basically one of his leadership people now is been someone going around who is very much an anti-Israeli, pro-Palestinian activist, and he's going to be part of the government. And so it's going to reflect that in the life of France. And the Jews are finding it harder and harder to live in France. And so this is what's happening. As like we said earlier, one of our signs, 25 signs, we're near the end. They're going to move out of their various countries to Israel because there doesn't seem to be any other safe haven at the time of the end, because the whole world, sign 21 of our 25 signs, is against basically Israel and what they're standing for at the last days. And finally, headline number 6, it's also happening in the UK. You vote for the left, you vote for Labour. Keir Starmer, that's the new prime minister, says he wants to pass an emergency legislation in order to censor anti-vax campaigns because they cost lives. All right. Now, we're not anti-vaxxers here, but we also know that there's been problems with the different vaccines that have tried to respond to the Chinese Communist Party coronavirus, COVID-19. And people just report there's people watching here today that have shared with me that they've had all kinds of repercussions for getting the jab, and it's physically been problematic. And so he doesn't even want this to be allowed to even be talked. And we've got the uh, protests here will not be heard because Starmer is going to, he's got the 400 in his party in the parliament. The next parties, the Tories, only got like 100 and something, so he can basically do what he wants. So censorship is the order of the day. We see it also in the European Union as the order of the day. So what does all this mean? Well, what it means is the world is shaping up just like the Bible says. And we're going to talk about this right now, real briefly. The characteristics of the last days kingdom. And our sign 13 of 25 signs, we're near the end in our book, will be a one world political and economic system, or globalism. We talk about this, and also in sign 12 of how a 10-nation confederation will join in Western Europe, the revival of the ancient Roman Empire, which will be the final kingdom before the coming of Christ. Stephen Miller, who's written an excellent book on Daniel, listen to what he says, how he describes this last kingdom here. He says, the people or peoples, nations or divisions represented by the iron mixed with clay, and that's what it is. It's something that doesn't adhere. Iron mixed with clay will constitute one kingdom, a mixture, although they will not remain united. Evidently, the meaning is that in spite of the fact that these groups will compose one empire, they will never truly become one people, for they will maintain separate cultures and their own national identities. This is precisely what's happening in our world, where you've got the EU, the European Union, these other unions that are forming. Basically, there'll be a central control where no one can buy or sell. Revelation 13, without the mark of the beast, we know in the last days, there has to be a central control to allow that to happen. And there has to be some type of, like we said, digital currency, because you can't watch every cash transaction in the world by people handing over physical cash. So all this is setting the stage for what the Bible says is going to take place at the time of the end. The governments could care less about the will of the people, and so it's going to be iron mixed with clay, partly strong, partly brittle, and the people would never adhere to what the powers that be that say. But it doesn't really matter, because those in charge do not care about the masses of the people, and they certainly won't at the time of the end, which will allow this final Antichrist to take over. So what do we see? Elections have consequences. Joe Biden, he's going to run again in November. Could he win? Yes, he could, believe it or not. Don't say he can't. Look what's happening in France. What a mess there. Have communists ruling. And then in the UK, you've got at least 5 years of the man who's the new prime minister that says he's a socialist. And welcome to the world of socialism, where you share the wealth. And so, just as the Bible says, the world is moving in this direction. So we'll continue with the stories each day about what's taking place. But what we see here, again, it's amazingly how everything falls into place, just like the Bible says. Are we surprised? No. Are we amazed? Always. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Until next time, may the Lord richly, richly bless.